morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is what we call Approachable DR, and we're going to talk a lot about how virtualization really enables you to do DR and do it effectively and with lower costs than traditional solutions. Before we introduce ourselves, we want the audience to know that there is a question section for you to ask questions as we go through the presentation, and Chris and I will do our best to answer those. So I'm Jim Hannon. I'm a principal architect at House of Brick Technologies. I work a lot with the Oracle Technologies database, middleware. I'm also a vSphere administrator, and I do a lot of reference architecture as it relates to the primary site and also the DR site.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Vacanti. I'm a senior consultant at House of Brick also. My emphasis is infrastructure, virtualization, disaster recovery, planning, implementations, upgrades, you name it, kind of the general sysadmin type approach. Excited to be here with you this morning.
So a little bit about House of Brick and you know how we got into DR. We really started off in 1998 as a team of DBAs, and our primary focus at that time was implementation and performance troubleshooting. As part of troubleshooting performance, we quickly realized that we had to be more than just DBAs. We had to understand the whole stack, the whole platform, be able to look at storage, be able to look at the operating system, to really be effective with performance tuning. Fast forwarding to today, I think it was about 12 years ago we really started looking at VMware and implementing it with our customers. And to us, virtualization was just another platform like we had been working with before as far as the operating system. As we progressed through our virtualization journey, we really quickly realized that all the opportunities it opens up. And today, one of the opportunities is Approachable DR.
So as we go through our presentation today, there's going to be some, IT is notorious for having acronyms, right? So we wanted to make sure to cover the potentially broad spectrum of audience and participants. We covered some acronyms that we'll be using. They're listed there on the screen: DR, disaster recovery, business continuity. We wanted to highlight, too, that today's conversation is about DR, not business continuity. And I like to tell people this is the definition between the two. We're in Omaha, Nebraska, so if we had a disaster recovery event, that would be our entire warehouse is spread across a cornfield because of a tornado. Business continuity would be somebody brought in corn from that field and we all got sick. So that's the difference between the two. RPO and RTO are industry terms. Recovery point objective is how far back at what point in time did you have a sound environment, and that is where you want to go back to. Your recovery time objective is how fast. How fast can you bring your business back online? Again, business continuance plan, we will talk about a little bit about a BCP. Again, that's more of think of a people resource or procedural or process issue as opposed to catastrophic failures. Network bubble and fencing, we're going to talk about and use the term the bubble. Think of it as a safe space. It's a place where we can turn on technology and be able to utilize testing of applications and data and vet our DR processes without impacting our production world. CRM, customer relationship management, it's a database tool where people store client data. Thin or a zero client, a lot of people have heard of thin clients. Zero clients are similar. They're small devices that allow us to connect into a virtual environment for desktops. We call it VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, that gives us the ability to not have powered on desktop per se, moving parts at the employee's desktop environment. So those are some of the terms. If we happen to mention others along the way, throw the question in the chat and ask us. We'll clarify what we said.
All right, so we gathered up some DR statistics that we thought were interesting. These come from a study that Gartner published in 2015. So the first one is 3/4 of the business get a failing grade for DR. I know that when Chris and I looked at this and we've talked with customers that we worked with, we were seeing similar statistics that businesses, they might have DR, but there's things they've forgotten about, or they're not diligent about testing DR.
Well, I worked with a client one time that said that they had paid literally tens of thousands of dollars to have a DR plan made.
Right.
And that page, there was like a 50-page document, and in reviewing it, it didn't mention the network at all.
Right.
And in talking to the staff, their DR solution for the network was to rebuild their entire network stack over an 8-hour period. So while they had an expectation their business could be back online at 1 hour, that was after they rebuilt their entire core infrastructure after 8 hours. So
right.
They missed kind of an important miss.
Well, and that's a good lead up. You talked about 8 hours of extra downtime, and here's another stats that Gartner published. For a small business, that probably means about $8,000 an hour that you're losing. So for this customer that you're talking about, that's very significant. And it goes all the way up to $700,000 for an enterprise per hour. 18.5 hours is the average time to recover from a disaster. So 18.5 hours is too long. You can see that from bullet 2. There's a lot of revenue that got lost. And 95% of businesses have experienced an outage unrelated to a natural disaster. So let's look at that more in this next slide. And Chris and I spent a lot of time talking about this. This was interesting to us. So, you know, downtime factors, 45% are operational. And as Chris and I discussed, operational to us is you've had a hardware outage. Maybe you lost connectivity at your primary site.
Or your SAN fails.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody, I once had a coworker that installed vSphere on the LUN where the VMs lived instead of upgrading on the local disk.
Right.
Kind of wiped out 20 VMs.
Well, and so that's human error, which we can touch on next. That's a good lead-in, and that's 19%. And then 35% is natural disasters. And Chris and I have certainly worked with a lot of customers that are located in hurricane areas, and you know that damage can last for days, if not weeks.
Well, and then think about the publicity, the bad publicity that you get, or your competitors who might be outside the hurricane zone might be saying, hey, look, we're still in production, and they're underwater.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. This is a good time to talk about this. We did a case study with Latham, a company that's located in New Orleans, and luckily they were on the higher ground in the area, so they weren't underwater, but it was hard for their workers to get into the facilities to do manufacturing. And what their competitors were doing is they were going to all their customers and saying, yeah, these guys can't do business. And to counter that, what Latham did is they would take pictures of them actually packaging up their products and saying, see, customer, we're still servicing you.
Yeah, it's a good point in the presentation to mention that we do have a poll question. What grade would you give your current DR solution and its reliability? Oh, yep, there's on the screen. So head out to the poll, answer that question for us. We would like to see if what other people are seeing in the industry matches with what some of those statistics we just gave.
And how the polling works is we keep it open. We do have another poll, so we'll probably close this one around that time, and then we'll share the data with everybody. Should be interesting.
So the industry that we work in IT, there is a myriad of technologies, a myriad of vendors. This, word cloud is just a few things that we threw together. We have legacy technology from tapes, we have modern technology and HA and all sorts of things. A lot of questions come to mind from a business perspective. Well, how do we navigate and find the solution that's best for us? From an IT perspective, we've got thousands of options, and who's going to give us the t-shirts, right? Isn't that the question we always ask? Well, I want a t-shirt, who's going to give me that?
Right.
But it's pairing the business needs and that technology together. So we're going to run through a scenario with we call it Lars Manufacturing. They're a mid-sized company, about 120 employees, and they emphasize manufacturing. They use VDI, which is that virtual desktop infrastructure with the thin clients. So their employee interfaces are all virtual. They store customer orders in a CRM, and that server is virtualized as well. And in this scenario that we play through today, to show you how approachable DR can be, they've brought us in, they need a DR solution.
Oh, that's a good question. How do I vote for the polling question? I don't know what the audience interface looks like, but what I see on mine is it says votes for audience. It's towards the bottom, I think.
We'll keep going through, and we'll work through that polling question. Bear with us while we, as technical guys, ask for IT support. So.
Great. All right, so we're going to talk a lot about the run book, and really it's the foundation of your DR process and strategy. So the run book, what it is this is your playbook. When you declare a DR event, this is what you're going to go to. This is how you're going to execute the workflow to get your business up and running again. The run book, Chris and I spent some time talking about this. The run book is dynamic. It's always changing. It's always growing as your IT is always changing. And so what needs to happen is this isn't a one-time event. You can see the circle we made. You need to keep refining the run book. And I'll tell you, that can be challenging for customers. A lot of times they build their run book and they put it away. And that's just not going to help your DR strategy if an event does occur.
All right, so it looks like the poll is up and online. We are seeing some responses come in. Thank you, guys. So in a run book scenario, as we go through in any business and we want to plan, that was the first part of the run book preparation cycle. We're going to go meet with the business. Too many times in IT, we jump right to fix it, implementation. And we, as IT people, that is typical of our nature. We get paid to solve problems. It's the best industry to be in. But we can't meet the business needs if we don't go out and ask what that is. So we gather the business requirements, and we ask them, how long can the business tolerate being offline? And for some, it may be a short period of time. We hear about high availability, so in those environments we consider almost zero downtime. We hear 5 nines in the industry, but we really have to ask the business, is that realistic? And if it is, that comes with a high cost, right? We spend a lot of money to get to 5 9.
And on that note of spending a lot of money, I think there's a tendency for an IT administrator implementing DR to kind of run off and go do it rogue without really talking to the business about requirements. And you and I have seen this several times. We're protecting things we might not need to protect. That some of these things can come up off of a cold backup a few days after the DR event. So it's really essential that in this planning stage that you're communicating, you're working with the business, and then also help the business understand. Here's the risk. If we implement this plan, here's some of the risks we're eliminating. Here's some of the risks that still exist.
And one thing I like to make clear as we're out and working with clients and in the industry is in IT, oftentimes we will pre-qualify a solution that the business has asked for and not present it because of the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is not the responsibility to determine what is and is not an acceptable price point.
It's a business decision.
That's a business decision. Ours is to present a few options that could solve that. If we go and look at this rudimentary graph we made, it kind of shows you that if the cost is high, let me rephrase that, if the business wants low risk, they have a very low risk tolerance, you potentially could spend a lot of money. Some companies are cool with that. You bring them a very expensive solution and say, this is the Cadillac, the primo solution, and the company says, done, we'll take it. Others are going to say, no, tell me what I can get, out of Dollar General. Well, that's somewhere you're going to meet in the middle and have that sweet spot that accommodates their downtime needs, their risk tolerance, and the cost, and then we'll be able to move on to the next phase.
And I'm not sharing anything new with any administrators on the phone today, but we know that the business in the beginning is going to ask for quite a bit as far as DR, but when those costs start coming back. So be patient with them. This is an iterative process that you have to work through with them.
Yeah, the first time that they actually have IT come out to them and sit down and say, hey, we want to ask your opinion, be prepared for some shock.
Right.
But
right.
we encourage it.
Right.
So then we move into the implementation phase, and this is when we meet as consultants with business units, we like to tell them, please step back and let IT do what they do best.
That's right.
In our world, we are to fix things, so let us do that. We are going to consider multiple network providers for replication, for uplinks, for connectivity. We're going to go through all those pieces of the puzzle.
And you and I joke about you get that knock on the door, and it's the business, and they want to be part of the implementation, and you don't want that. You don't want them picking software. You've got your requirements. That's why you did your due diligence there.
Yeah, oftentimes they come knock on the door and they say, hey, IT, here's the solution that we found we want you to implement. And I would ask everybody to metaphorically raise your hand if you've been through that, and we all have. But that's really not how it should be. So we go ask the business what they'd like to see, what their expectation is. We go create the plan in IT, take it back to them and say, here's what we can do to meet your needs. It's always been a better success rate doing it that way than letting the business come and tell us what they think would be best.
And on that note, when the business is doing the driving, where they go talk to the app vendor and they have this DR solution, what happens is you end up getting a hybrid, a mix of DR technologies that you're maintaining. And when DR gets complicated, it's not effective. Chris and I like to call DR for most organizations is at best a part-time job. It's something that you do after your traditional day-to-day duties.
When you're done putting the fires out, and then 3 weeks later after you met with the business and they say, did you get that DR plan implemented? Implement, like play the cricket sound, right?
Right, right.
Unfortunately, we don't always, that's not our primary role. So after we implement things, we go into a testing phase. I really love the little graphic we put on there. I wanted to check like poor, but that kind of sends the wrong idea to the business for anybody who might be in the business listening. Mm-hmm. In IT, we fully expect that during round one of our testing, we are going to have issues. Things are going to come up, but that's why we do the testing in that bubble. We plan effectively. Don't try to do a complete DR plan test in your live environment the first time. Don't try to do it in a 2 to 3 hour test window. Give yourself an isolated test bubble. Give yourself hours. Create a test plan and validate that. You've got to ask the question, how did it go? You have to solicit feedback. You have to have end users log in and validate. Whatever that validation is, If it's bringing the server up, great. If it's a service running, great. If it's accessing data in a database, great. We like to take it a step further and say, can you have an end user get into this space? Can they open their app and can they do their job? That's in essence what DR is all about, giving the business a chance to be back online. And we're going to refine that plan. That's why it's a circle. It's going to come back around time and time again.
And to that point, go ahead and prepare your business for the first time you test. There's going to be remediation. That's why we're doing the testing. And that will demonstrate, first of all, it's transparent. And then the clarity of how testing is very important, and the business will understand that when you talk about what remediations had to be done. And it will probably give you the opportunity where the business sincerely wants you to do more testing, and they're going to carve out time for you to do it.
And keep the communication open. Absolutely, with the business, keep it open. So this is a slide that we drew. This is literally a diagram that we made based off of some testing that we did for a client. They have their primary site, then they have their vSphere replication over to a secondary site. We did create a test environment, brought up some rack nodes. We helped build a run book with them that you can't bring the database server online where it relies on DNS if you don't have DNS in that space. So IT has a requirement too. You need to gather all of your technical requirements, put them all together in that space, and make sure you bring on, if it's your domain controller, if it's DHCP, whatever it is that needs to come up before you bring your applications online so they work, especially if you're running services with domain credentials. That all has to be vetted inside that test space. And this is a great way to plan it out and show that to the business. Say, look, this is how we're going to do it, and this is what we need to do.
Oops, it jumped one. There we go. So this is, DR lessons learned. This could have been 15 slides, but we kept it short. And you've heard us talk about this before. When you don't gather requirements, you've already put yourself at a big disadvantage for your DR strategy. And we get it. The personality of IT administrators is kind of, go get something done and, do it your way. But that's just not going to be effective. You're absolutely going to need to work with a business and understand requirements. And a good example of that is I was working for a company that does online catalog sales, and they determined that we only have one warehouse for our inventory. So if that goes, we really don't have a business that's operational other than the data that we own. So we did do some DR for them, but it was very scoped on how we got, tapes off-site. Like I just talked about, the right way, work with the business in the planning stages to determine requirements. Wrong, assume everything needs to be protected. What you'll find out is that probably about a third of it is really business critical. Other items, maybe a reporting server can come back online 2 or 3 days after the DR event.
Absolutely.
And a big one is in the planning stage, yes, you can calculate your bandwidth needs. There's lots of tools that will show you your data rate change, so that's absolutely something you can do. And then you want to think about, ask the business, what are we expecting for growth? And go ahead and look at that and make that investment that there will be some growth and the bandwidth needs to be X.
We like to joke about this slide, virtualize everything. And you imagine the audience asking the question, everything? And from a House of Brick perspective, absolutely. Absolutely, we're going to encourage you to virtualize everything. You are going to be able to get the best bang for your buck out of a completely virtualized environment. We did a case study recently at VMworld Jim and I did where we talked about a completely virtualized environment for a credit union in California, Travis Credit Union, and they were only able to have an approachable DR scenario because of that. And
yeah, and Craig, who co-presented with us, he's the VP of IT. He talked about, Chris, their old DR strategy versus what they were able to do with their new virtualized DR strategy. And he talked about, and I forgot the number, Chris, his old strategy would take him days to recover. Under the new strategy, he could be up and running in 15 minutes.
yeah, it's pretty impressive. So
Shan, yeah, let's close the pool. We've got another one for you. Whoops, it jumped again.
I think I hit the button. I gotta keep my hands off the keyboard.
User error. All right, so this is our final poll question. We're really interested in, are you using VMware today? And I want you to answer the question of think of it more of, am I using VMware for my business critical applications? Because when we talk DR, that's what we're really going to be protecting.
Yeah, following the money. What keeps your business revenue coming in? A lot of companies who may not have been early adopters to business critical applications in a virtualized environment, they might be hosting file servers or print servers in that space. We're specifically concerned about making DR approachable from a business critical and disaster recovery perspective in that.
And I think, and I know Chris believes this too, virtualizing everything and leveraging DR, the TCO on that is really strong when compared to more of the traditional technologies to do DR. So I think you're going to be happy if you do that analysis that you can save quite a bit of money, and this can happen.
So we said in our presentation, we went through this Lars Manufacturing and worked with them, and we also mentioned in the beginning that we're going to give you information that you could walk out of this call today, and if you're in the business side of things, go back to your IT staff and say, hey, are we doing these kind of things? If you don't have a strongly effective DR process right now, these are the next 3 slides as we talk about technical solutions to making your DR approachable. These are things you could go back and start with after you talk to the business, but you can start with these things immediately. You can leverage the power of your virtualized environment if you're using vSphere to get that ROI and to be able to have an approachable DR solution.
This is outstanding. 75% of the audience that's responded to our second poll question says that they are running on VMware.
And see, that's outstanding.
Yep.
If you're not, we'd love to ask the question why.
Yeah,
but hopefully something we do today from a Tier 1 perspective, hopefully what we talk about will help you see that this is totally approachable, totally doable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So the first piece of the puzzle here is vSphere. We have, obviously, for those who are using virtualization, 75%, 76% now, that's outstanding. I would assume you understand the value and the power behind that hypervisor and that environment. For those that aren't, I was telling Jim before we did this, back in the physical world, I used to work for the 3rd largest telecommunications provider in Omaha, or in the U.S., and in the call center, I made the mistake one time of pulling a failed drive out of a mirrored array, and that cost a 24-hour outage on the ACD platform for the call routing. And that was a mistake. That's the human error component that we talk about,
and
right?
the mirroring failed.
The mirroring failed.
Mm-hmm.
The server went down. It was down. Myself and a team member, we worked with the vendor for overnight.
So it was operational and human error.
Yeah.
You hit both buckets.
And then the next day, we had to turn it over to 2 of our peers so we could go home and sleep, and they finally got it back online that afternoon. But it really impacted the business. Well, we never would have had that issue if we were in a virtualized environment. So that's just one example of how virtualization, and that's a Tier 1, application, your call routing platform.
Absolutely.
So consider the power of vSphere in that. So then vSphere replication. In the world of moving data between your primary site and your recovery site, there are a number of great vendors that we at House of Brick have actually worked with side by side to help people move data. But what is often overlooked is a tool that comes with your base vCenter server licensing, which is the vSphere replication. Now with vSphere 6, you have the opportunity to have an RPO of 5 minutes, and that's outstanding. Prior to that, it was 15. But again, out at Travis Credit Union, we leverage that platform to be able to move the data between primary and recovery sites.
And they did have Recovery Point, an EMC product, which we worked with a lot. It's an outstanding product. But they got uncomfortable. They didn't have a lot of familiarity, and we said, okay, well, we got something that's really easy to administer. Let's get this implemented for now, and we can circle back. Though the more I think about it, Chris, I think they're set. I think what vSphere Replication's doing for them is perfect.
Yeah, the granularity of that.
Right.
You know,
right.
when we talk about being able to identify from the business perspective what the critical path is and what needs to be protected, when we use the power of vSphere replication and we can say that VM and that VM, regardless of where they live in the storage world, operationally, we can have a myriad of people in our IT department do those configurations and validate that the data is being moved, and we're meeting our RPO.
And they do have data guard, but we're looking at that and saying, do we really need it anymore? Because as we've been talking about, we don't want a lot of technologies in this DR solution. We have the opportunity, and we want to be holistic and have that one mechanism.
Now, a caveat, and this is the little asterisk. For the presentation we're doing today, we're talking about an approachable DR solution. These are the tools that we're advocating can be used in that situation. We're not saying go back to your business, and if you're using Recover Point or Rapid Recovery or Zerto or Veeam, take them out. We're absolutely not saying that. There are different functionalities involved with those tools that your business criticality could depend on. But from an approachable DR perspective, if you're running vCenter and you're running anything from Essentials Plus and up, you already have the rights to run vSphere replication. And that's why we bring it up, because it's native to the vSphere platform.
That's right. Something you can do right now today.
Yeah, you don't have to go get any special training.
Right.
It's like 5 or 10 minutes or less, and you can already be replicating a VM.
But understand your bandwidth requirements.
Yeah, don't flood your outbound pipes. So then from the third component to this, from a technical perspective, is vSAN. vSAN is a licensed standalone product, so there would be an incremental cost outside of what you're paying for your vSphere and your vCenter server environment. What I really like about vSAN is, and I'm going to say this from an enterprise class solution, we're talking Fortune 500 and above.
Yeah.
vSAN is a fantastic tool.
Yeah, we're talking, you might have owned one of their cars. We're talking very big enterprises.
You've probably flown on their planes, driven their cars, had packages moved around the United States by their stuff. But let's bring it home to an SMB space.
Mm-hmm.
vSAN, once again, is a fantastic solution for that environment. And the reason being is you're no longer tied to a specific storage vendor, storage design, implementation, any of that.
What does vSAN look like for the audience that might be new to it?
Well, that's a good point, good question. vSAN, what it is you have, for example, if you had 3 DR hosts, your ESX hosts on your
mm-hmm.
in your recovery site,
mm-hmm.
I would go out and I would purchase 3 recovery nodes and lay them in the environment, connect them up with connectivity.
Right.
They're called the vSAN ready nodes.
And Dell sells them basically. It's a vSAN appliance ready to go.
Yeah, it's a box of disks.
Mhm.
Again, it's storage vendor agnostic. You just drop them in, you put them in, you can build your own. There's a hardware compatibility list. You could build your own if you have hardware laying around and it does meet the requirements from VMware. But you build this vSAN environment through your vCenter interface. And it's a little bit jumping the gun, but I'm stressing these three pieces of the technology together because you have a single pane of glass management. You have a single pane of glass for setting up your virtual machines, protecting your critical environment, moving your data from one site to the other, and having storage being managed in that VMware interface that I would say, obviously based on the numbers, 76% of us are familiar with, right?
And for me, what really jumps out about vSAN, it's approachable. It's easy administration for storage. And the other thing is when we talked about, these are Fortune 50 companies, when we talked about them, they were all seeing 50% ROI, and the business was saying, I want everything on vSAN IT. Like they can't move fast enough.
So we deal with, in our world, we deal with a lot of silos, don't we, Jim?
We do.
And
I was just thinking about that.
We see that everywhere, and business leaders are trying to find solutions to eliminate the silos. And if I have two people there and one does VMware and one does storage, well, now if I bring in vSAN, now I have two great admins. Do a little cross-training, bring them together. And what I love about this is when we talk about building that playbook, when we talk about the run book, we should have our vendor phone numbers, we should have SLAs, we should have support contract information built into this run book so that when we say execute a DR situation, if that admin isn't available, you just call VMware. You
Right.
get on the phone with VMware and they can remote in and help you out in your situation.
And to your point, one person can't own DR.
No, it's a group effort.
Yeah, that's an availability problem if that person's unavailable in a DR event occurs. I mean, you just shot yourself in the foot. So.
Yeah, and then, from the people perspective, the DR component needs to be there as well. But this empowers the business to come back and walk away from our call today and have an idea and say, wow, we can meet our needs, right? If we look at our poll responses,
Yeah. Let's read them for the audience. So this is the first question. What grade would you give your current DR solution and its reliability? 5% are saying like a boss, thumbs up. They're getting it. 58%, and Chris and I thought that this would be the majority. Give me a little bit and we'll be online, boss. And then 23 said, where are those tapes? I'll go recover things. And then we have 5 and 5% on both. Ignore the smoke. We'll be okay. And what is DR? No, really, what is DR?
Well, if you're in those bottom categories, if you're in the tape category, I would ask you to go back to the business if you're not the business. If you go back to the business and say, what's your expectation for our recovery? Are we meeting your, and keep in mind, ask yourself the question, are you able to meet the expectation that they're about to give you? And you may have to change some things. We give you the opportunity to do that through vSphere, vSphere replication, and vSAN. If you're down in the bottom tiers about the smoke and what is DR, those are opportunities to be promoted to customer, depending on where you're currently working.
Yeah.
But hopefully you can walk back today and say, hey, maybe I'm a new admin. Maybe I'm new to the industry I'm in. We just gave you tools that you can take back and build a plan around and take to your leadership and say, no, I really think we can approach this DR conversation with some confidence. Absolutely we can. and leveraging the power of VMware in those three products?
So our marketing manager, who helped us put this together, reminded me that Chris and I are working on a blog, and it's going to be a more thorough list of, here's your DR checklist, here's the things that you need to think about, and it will give you the opportunity to kind of grade yourself. You know, where is my DR solution strong and what are its weaknesses? What things do I need to remediate? So we put some, a few bullets together here, but yeah, look for our blog in the next few weeks. It will be lots more extensive. So yeah, the runbook, once it's created, you have to keep it up to date. That's one of the biggest challenges that customers face when they're doing DR is procedurally, how do I keep that up to date? How do I, my primary site's in constant change, as we're all aware of in IT.
So we had a question, a comment from the audience.
Oh, wonderful.
When I said I don't have VMware environment, I meant I'm using Hyper-V, just to be clear. And that's fair. And so,
yeah,
out of respect for that comment, when we mentioned other products like Zerto and Veeam and other vendors to be able to move that data from space to space, Zerto, which used to be typically called they were a DR platform, they now classify themselves as a data moving environment.
Yeah, they've made some significant upgrades with their product.
If I remember correctly from VMworld and talking to them, they can move your data from Hyper-V to VMware for a DR scenario. So maybe you can't use vSphere replication to protect your Hyper-V environment, but if you don't have a DR environment and you're using Hyper-V, you could use other tools and leverage 2 out of the 3 tools that we've talked about today.
I'm glad they asked that question because my stance on where the industry is going is that we're going to be running mixed hypervisors and environments.
Yep.
VMware's made, they haven't been shy about talking about their hypervisor. To them, it's a commodity. It's about the tooling.
Well, what did we learn this week about VMware being able to manage AWS? Right?
Right. And I think Hyper-V, we do work with Hyper-V. The product's just getting stronger and stronger. And if you're a Windows shop, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So, good question. We appreciate it. Thank you.
So quickly with the DR checklist, monitoring that bandwidth usage is really important. You have to understand how your data rate is changing as your business is going through growth. And keeping an eye on, having that monitoring tool, being able to go back a month ago, being able to go back a year ago and start to forecast, hey, what's it going to look like in another year if we keep the same growth going? And then having a clearly defined test plan. And like we talked about before, this is an opportunity for you to educate the business about how important test plans are, how important that we select dates so that we're able to do this remediation. And then we already talked about this, but it's worth talking about again. Multiple administrators have to be capable of executing DR. It can't just be one person.
Well, and think about this. Take that word administrators out of the picture. You could say multiple people are capable of executing DR.
Yeah, that's a better bullet.
I kind of think that DR should be a team approach. It's a collaborative effort between the business and IT. And if you have this runbook clearly defined and in the scope of what we're talking about today with vSphere, vSphere replication, and vSAN, I've got the phone number for VMware in there with my support contract, and I could have someone from HR call VMware, logged into a PC and say, I can't get a hold of IT, I'm on the DR team, I've been told I need to call you, can you help me out, right? Becomes extremely approachable at that point.
Yeah, VMware support's great with that.
And keep in mind, too, that there are other components of the DR conversation that come into play. For us today, we were strictly talking about, a theoretical CRM on a database with some VDI VMs. But there are other components you want to take into consideration. The network, you may have storage constraints, may have storage issues, uplinks, bandwidth, firewalls, You know, if you work in a PCI or a HIPAA environment, you have other constraints there. So I don't want anyone to feel like we've minimized this as a 5-minute solution. It definitely isn't.
Right.
It's going to take some time, but this gives you an outline, a skeleton you can go work with to help out there.
Well, Chris, we're at the Q&A section, and there's going to be a few more slides after the Q&A, and they're just additional resources for you on some of the things we talked about. Some of them are case studies with customers that we've worked with. We did mention Lathrop, so that case study will be available for you. We also linked to some blogs on licensing and a white paper that we did because it's so important to figure out your cost of running DR. Don't think you have to license it exactly like production. You can minimally license, like an example would be Oracle, and then if you do declare a DR event, then we can bump you up to match the primary site. So let's do a little Q&A, Chris. We're about at 46 minutes here, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a question for you, because I know our CTO talks about this a lot. Chris, how far away should your DR site be from your primary?
Well, that's a great question. I think, and this is kind of a facetious answer, it should be far enough away. And when I say far enough away, in Omaha we don't have earthquakes. Mm-hmm. Well, we felt one from Wichita down in Oklahoma the other day, but we typically don't have earthquakes here. So your DR site could be in the same town. Now, we have tornadoes, and some of those get to be pretty wide. So you would want to make sure that your tornado path, typical path, you're not going to run over both data facilities. But in California, where you have earthquakes, your DR site might be further away. And the further it is, the more your price point is going to go up from your connectivity and running those circuits, so, and bandwidth needs and whatnot. So keep that in mind too.
All right. This is what are some of the common issues customers run into when implementing DR?
I think over-optimism is what probably hurts people the most.
And for me, it's networking challenges. That there might be a tendency to say, oh, I'm just going to rebuild the whole network when we declare the DR event. Well, that's going to cost you lots of recovery time.
Hard-coded IPs?
Yep.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem.
DNS isn't where it needs to be. So those are challenges that you want to address before you get DR implemented. And then Chris, because we got to talk about cloud because that's what the whole industry wants to talk about.
Oh yes.
So let's talk about disaster recovery as a service, which is a new hot topic.
So I really love what I've seen recently. Someone made the statement that the cloud is somebody else's computer. And as long as you keep that in mind, there are a lot of business who want to be early adopters and go 100% cloud.
Yeah.
But we've seen in the industry recently there's been some outages in the cloud, right?
Yeah, those are great commercials on Sunday during football, but there's a reality to it too.
Well, there is a reality to it, and I think you could split. You could split the cloud.
With all the research that I've been doing, so we're for Bright Talk, we're actually going to be doing a cloud presentation, and it's the 15th, Shannon? No, November 15th. And what we're going to talk about is the cost of running in the cloud, and then like Chris talked about, you look at the Starbucks outage, you look at, there's a handful that had everything in the cloud, all your eggs in one basket. And, that really puts you at jeopardy if, these clouds, as they have outages, because we're not picking on any of them. They're all the big vendors, the handful that are out there, have had an outage
well, I think it's
between now and 2015. So these are recent.
And I think it's inevitable that every I say a large majority of our clients and people in the IT space are going to leverage the power of the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
I know when we talk about outside of the scope of some of the tools we talked about today, Veeam and others, they actually allow you to DR direct to the cloud. And so that's one tool that gives you the power of having your on-premise products, and you pick one of their dedicated and approved data centers based on geography and what your needs are, and you just DR your data right out to their cloud space.
And what cloud providers don't like doing is they don't like having SLAs. So when you talk about a business critical application, you've got to work with them and get that in the contract. The same goes for disaster recovery as a service. What I worry about is not getting my data out there. I worry about the recovery time objective. How quickly can I get my data when I need it?
Well, and consider this, if you're working with DR as a service, when there is an event, and for example, the recent hurricane that just came through, that affected multiple states in the U.S.
Right, and that's where you talk about, that's a situation where if you're in those locations, you've got to move your secondary site away from a hurricane area.
But remember, you're calling your DR provider.
Mm-hmm.
If you outsource that, you're calling your DR provider just like everybody else is too.
Awesome.
And,
point.
you know, we've all seen the bottleneck images of traffic leaving, right, when Katrina came through, all the people trying to get out of New Orleans. You're going to be waiting in the queue in line, so...
Yeah, it's just like the gas stations.
Yeah. So you have to balance, yes, your data point objective gives you the ability to bring your data back to 15 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago, but if you can't bring it on for 3 days, what good was that?
And we're kind of getting a little into backups, but that's okay because it's part of a good DR strategy. But I think disaster recovery as a service where you're getting your data out there is a great idea.
Yep.
But it can't be all the eggs in one basket. You have to have another mechanism.
Yep. When you call up your DR provider and get a busy signal because everybody else is calling too, you just have to plan. Any questions from the audience?
Well, yeah, that's a nice comment. Thank you. Someone had to leave at an appointment in London. I'm going to jump to additional resources. So we're wrapping up, everybody, on just this slide and another slide. So if you got any questions, go ahead and fire them off. And thank you, everybody, for doing the polls and asking questions and being interactive. It makes it fun. So additional resources, we talked about Latham. Again, that's the company in New Orleans. So they've been in a DR event. They take DR very serious. Chris and I really enjoy working with them. They're the type of admins that they want to understand the whole stack, and that's how you become successful with virtualization. Whether it's VMware or Hyper-V, is if you're a DBA or you're a vSphere admin, collaborating together and understanding how does storage play into this. How does this impact my database performance? We also, and Chris, I think you worked on this project, we have a SRM case study that talks about a company that implemented VMware SRM, Site Recovery Manager, and greatly reduced their RPO and RTO times. And then Chris wrote this blog, Disaster Recovery 2.0. Do you want to kind of touch on that, Chris?
Yeah, the idea is that, and we kind of highlighted it today, the worst DR solution is the one that you think works. And that's really a bad place to be. It's represented on our poll with some of the questions. What is DR, or give us a little bit and we'll be back online. But if you haven't tested your DR solution, and I'm not saying that ideally the perfect scenario would be you would be able to fail over your production environment and test it. Is that a reality that most companies can do? I don't think so. But I do think that if you leverage the power of a test bubble, an isolated space, and that's very easy to do in VMware, then you can validate up to 98%. I'm going to be back online.
That's right. And then we also, you've heard us talk about Oracle and SQL Server quite a bit. Oracle licensing is one of our business lines, and Oracle makes licensing difficult. We think they do it, kind of for their own advantage. But it's a big topic. It certainly is a topic when considering DR. Like I said, we have services, but we also have a lot of blogs out there on our website, houseofbrick.com. So if you've got some Oracle licensing questions, that's a really good place to start. We consider ourselves the leaders in the industry when it comes to Oracle licensing.
I just wanted to throw this out to the audience real quick. If there's other technical topics that you'd like to cover in an additional webinar at some point,
yeah,
throw that in the feedback section. It's easy for us to stand up here or sit here and speak to this topic, but what are your pain points in your industry?
Yeah, what are your challenges?
Maybe
right.
It's industry-centric, maybe it's technology-specific, maybe you're not in IT and you're in the business and you want to understand something a little more.
And I think for my closing remark, what I'd like to talk about is, business-critical applications and virtualizing them. That can be a big step for a lot of customers. It can be a scary step. And what I want to kind of share, our story. Back in 2007, we virtualized our first rack database, our instance. So people have been doing this for a very long time, and they've been doing it successfully. The particular customer in 2007 said, why didn't we do this years ago? So I want you to know that if you're advocating, and I can see this, the poll's changing, 20% are saying VMware is under consideration. That if you go out to our website, you're going to see case studies and links to Indiana University, University of British Columbia, and these go back, 7, 8 years ago. So customers are doing it, they're doing it successfully. This goes beyond Oracle, this can be SQL Server or whatever you have that's business critical.
Yep, let us know.
So yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you again for attending. Thank you for all the good questions, and thank you for taking time to do the poll. We thought that was really, really interesting, and I'm pleasantly surprised how many people are running VMware. I think that's terrific.
Yep, thanks everybody. We appreciate you being here.